Chapter 35 to 42. Thankfully, Ron had only been ranting about the evilness of Slytherin House for a few minutes before there was a knock on their compartment door. It slid open to reveal a round-faced boy looking slightly tearful. "Sorry," he said, "but have you seen a toad at all?" When they shook their heads, he wailed, "I've lost him. He keeps getting away from me." "He'll turn up," said Harry. "Yes," said the boy miserably. "Well, if you see him." "He left." "Don't know why he's so bothered," said Ron. "If I'd brought a toad I'd lose it as quick as I could. Mind you, I brought Scabbers, so I can't talk." The rat was snoozing on Ron's lap. Harry looked at the human pretending to be a rat and thought how perfect a time it would be to get rid of this annoyance. He also couldn't help but notice that the rat was missing an entire back foot as well as a finger on his front foot. His left eye also had a scar over it, but the eye itself seemed fine. How Percy liked the crippled rat enough to adopt it spoke to his weird tastes or magical compulsions. An adult male sleeping in a child's bed also could explain the strange behavior of Ron and Percy from the books. The version of Sirius and Peter's confrontation must have gone nearly the same as canon. The fact that Sirius had failed against a one-legged wormtail heavily suggested outside interference or mental fuckery. Harry wanted to capture the rat now but remembered that they would be interrupted once more and held back from acting for immediately. Sure enough, the door slid open once more, so soon that it even prevented Ron from suggesting turning his rat yellow for laughs or to show off. The toadless boy was back, but this time he had a girl with him. She was already wearing her new Hogwarts robes. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "Neville's lost one," she said. She had a bossy sort of voice, lots of bushy brown hair, and rather large front teeth. "We've already told him we haven't seen it," said Ron. Things had gone a bit differently from canon since Ron had not pulled his wand out yet to show his incompetence. Harry preferred to solve the situation quickly to prevent further interruptions to his plans and not become annoyed with a bossy little girl that was oblivious to her behavior. "Have you tried asking the prefects? I heard that there are some students in the older years that solve these types of problems," he supplied. "Of course. Why didn't I think of that?" "Thanks. Come on, Neville." Before the poor teary-eyed boy knew what was happening, he was dragged out of the compartment by the hyper girl doing her best to alienate herself. "Whatever house I'm in, I hope she's not in it," said Ron. Before he could launch into something else annoying, Harry hit him with a compulsion to sleep. The red-headed child yawned and then leaned against the window with his eyes closed. Harry then zapped Scabbers with a stunning charm and called for his head elf. "Boppy." With a pop, his most dependable elf appeared. "Yes, master. Take this rat to an isolated and secure base. Scan him for all magic and tracking spells just in case. He is the wizard that you threw rocks at the night I became your master, so be careful he doesn't escape. Make him human again and then strip him of everything he owns, clothes and all. Next, catch a rat, make it look like him, and bring it to me." "Yes, master." The head elf replied excitedly before grabbing his first ever enemy by the tail and popping away. 5 minutes later, the little guy returned with an exact replica of Peter Pettigrew's animagus form. It was even docile and lazy, happily munching on the food next to Ron when Harry indicated to place it there. With some encouraging words to Boppy for a job well done, Harry made himself invisible after the elf teleported away. He still had more Weasley family members to steal from. He found them in a compartment 9 doors away thanks to the overpowered Point Me spell. Why wizards have not used it to find every buried Muggle treasure, he would never know. They were so happy playing with Lee Jordan's tarantula that they never noticed the door slide open slightly. With the sudden urge to sleep, the 3 boys in the compartment nodded off, not even stirring as the massive spider crawled over them. A summon charm for the Marauders map yielded no results, indicating that it must be in one of their school trunks. Being wary of the 2 containers thanks to their penchant for pranks, he opened them at a distance with telekinesis. No magic activated, so they must have not been booby-trapped. Another summoning charm had a blank piece of parchment flying out of one of them into his waiting hand. A couple Obliviate charms concerning the map had Harry confident that he would not have 2 red-headed mischief makers hunting him down for it at a later date. The rest of the trip was nice and quiet with Ron asleep. He changed into his Hogwarts robes and pulled out a book to read for the rest of the pleasantly uninterrupted trip. A voice echoed through the train, "We will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train, it will be taken to the school separately." Harry woke Ron up and told him to change into his robes. While they were waiting to reach the station, he asked what Ron's dad did for a living. He then directed the conversation towards illegal artifacts and those that are sentient. So you are telling me that there are objects that can think and talk? Harry exclaimed with fake disbelief. Sure, there are talking mirrors and things like that, but they are mostly enchantments. Dad has always warned us to be careful about such things, though. He says to never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. Ron answered, puffing his chest out in pride at Harry's seemingly astonished face. The train slowed down and finally stopped at a poorly lit station. People pushed their way toward the door and out onto a tiny platform darkened by night. A lamp came bobbing over the heads of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years. First years over here. All right there, Harry. Hagrid's big hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. Come on, follow me, any more first years? Mind your step, now. First years follow me. Harry gave Hagrid a wave in greeting before everyone trailed after the half-giant. Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark on either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. You all get your first sight of Hogwarts in a second, Hagrid called over his shoulder, just around this bend here. There was a loud boo-hoo. The narrow path had opened suddenly onto the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. No more than 4 to a boat. Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by the shore. The shout had interrupted Harry as he marveled at the sight of the magical castle, and he had to admit, it was impressive. Not the most defensive-looking castle, but undoubtedly beautiful. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione just like canon, but there was little small talk. Everyone in! Shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. Right then, forward. The fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake that was smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the magnificent castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. The group of boats were carried along the lake until they reached a dark tunnel mostly concealed by a curtain of ivy, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle. The heads down instruction from Hagrid really only applied to him, but everyone still instinctively ducked. They soon reached a kind of underground harbor, where everyone jumped out onto the pebbles of the shore. Then they clambered up a passageway in the stone after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around the large, oak front door. After checking everyone was present, Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and the children's first thought was probably that this was not someone to cross. The first years, Professor McGonagall. Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here. Welcome to Hogwarts, said Professor McGonagall. The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's dirt-smudged nose. What followed was exactly like the book, everyone discussing how the sorting happened, the ghosts coming out to scare 11-year-old children and then being led into the Great Hall. It was lit by thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. The stool and the patched, frayed and filthy hat was brought out and placed in front of the first years. It sang its rather clever song, and then Professor McGonagall stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted, she said. Abbott, Hannah. Harry watched the students do as they were told and place a mind-reading hat on their heads as if it was the most natural thing to do. Slowly the students were sorted the same as canon with no changes, Harry not caring enough to make any. Potter, Harry. Professor McGonagall called his name at last. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter. The excited murmurs of the children brought up with the legend of the hero baby echoed throughout the hall. Harry walked up to Professor McGonagall, pretending to be a little shy under the scrutiny of hundreds and their murmuring. When he stood in front of the talking hat, he gave it a suspicious look and then turned to Professor McGonagall. I would like to go to Ravenclaw, please. Professor McGonagall was a bit stumped at the request, and the Great Hall suddenly became so quiet you could hear a mouse fart. You have to put the hat on to be sorted, Harry. She instructed with a kind tone in her stern voice. I would rather not. I was just talking with a boy on the train that told me all about the misuse of Muggle artifacts. He warned me to never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. This talking hat seems like it would fall under that category, especially if it reads minds. Harry responded precociously, like a small child when they think they are unquestionably correct. Professor McGonagall could only stare at Harry in shock, her mouth had even fallen open. To simply not put the sorting hat on just wasn't done. Instantly the once quiet hall erupted in muttering once more only to be overshadowed by an insulting voice. Got something to hide, Potter? Or do you just think you are special and better than the other students? This scathing remark came from a man at the teacher's table with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and sallow skin. This could only be the pathetic Severus Snape. He was responsible for everything that happened in his miserable life but blamed it on everyone else. The fact that he knew of Harry Potter's upbringing, yet still continued to treat the son of the woman he loved like trash spoke of his pettiness. How people liked his character Harry could not understand, the guy was an idiot and relished in bullying children. As morally bankrupt as Harry was, even he didn't find pleasure in emotionally destroying children. Yes sir, I do have something to hide, don't you? I have no desire to have my personal information, security precautions, or my intimate secrets known by anyone that simply asks a hat for them. I do not begrudge the other students of their choice to put a mind-reading artifact on their heads, as I'm sure that wizard families have certain protections. They don't have to worry about someone using this hat to find out their life goals, hidden alliances, or family magic secrets. Just imagine if they have seen their fathers do or plan something illegal, or how they protect their Gringotts key. I bet a criminal would love to examine a mind-reading hat that has sat on the head of every child from a noble house. There was absolute silence in the hall again as the pure-blood students' mouths fell open in horror of the implications of what was just said, even Snape was taken aback. Then there was pandemonium as everyone with something to be ashamed of or hide was demanding the hat be destroyed. A loud bang that sounded like a cannon firing suddenly shocked everyone quiet again, and then a booming voice roared out. Silence. Everyone looked to see that Albus Dumbledore had risen from his large gold chair and had a wand in his hand. His silver hair was shining as brightly as the ghosts flying above the tables, and coupled with his ostentatious robes, it made him stand out. The students waited quietly for the headmaster to speak, surely he would explain why they had to have their memories examined to be sorted into different groups for school. Students, this is a time-honored tradition that has existed since Hogwarts was founded. I can assure you that you have nothing to worry about, Mr. Potter, the hat remains protected in my office all year long. Dumbledore said with his best venerable sage impression. If it's all the same sir, I still rather choose Ravenclaw without using a mind-reading hat. I have come here to focus on learning magic since I was kept ignorant of it by someone's design. The other houses have enviable traits, but as I have only just learned I am a wizard, I fear I must choose knowledge for my chosen house trait. Countered Harry. I'm afraid that you must wear the sorting hat to be properly sorted into your house, Harry. If not, you may be placed incorrectly and not fit in with your fellow housemates. Dumble said with a stern edge to his grandfatherly act. But sir, how do we know this is the real hat created by the founders? What about Mr. Weasley's warning about artifacts being sentient and having its own personality? There is no reason for a mind-reading hat to tell me what house trait I want to focus on during my time at school. What guarantee do I have that it will not change my personality or modify my memories? Harry held his ground, making sure to keep repeating, mind-reading hat as much as he could. The dark muttering throughout the hall let him know that his refusal to wear the sorting hat was at least not being viewed like he was spitting on wizard traditions. That was the last thing he wanted, to alienate all the purebloods would be a tremendously stupid move to make. He just didn't want to put on a hat that may or may not be responsible for making wizards in Britain retarded. The fact that he was a reincarnator hellbent on enslaving all wizards and controlling the world also might have had something to do with it. Really, Mr. Potter, you have quite the imagination. The founders would not have created something that would harm its students. Just relax, I assure you the experience is not harmful in any way. Dumbledore continued to coax Harry into putting the hat on. It was slightly suspicious. If fake Moody could confuse a magical artifact to enter Harry Potter into a dangerous competition that would see his magic stripped if he didn't participate, then what Dumbledore could do with a mind-reading one was terrifying. I'm sorry, Headmaster, but my opinion on the matter won't change. I don't mean to be rude or disrespect tradition, but I have been wronged by some unknown person since my parents were murdered. The Ministry has assured me that it was not a follower of the Dark Lord, but have still launched an investigation into the matter. Still, whoever it was that kidnapped me to keep me ignorant of the wizarding world, I'd rather not make their job of ruining my life any easier by having all my fears and vulnerabilities in their hands thanks to a mind-reading hat. Besides, the Sorting Hat was created in a time when wizards and muggles were at war. They probably used the hat to screen anyone that meant harm to Hogwarts or its students. Or maybe it was a way to collect more magic techniques, who knows. Either way, it was created 1,000 years ago in a much less civilized time. Who can know what kind of precautions they deemed acceptable back then. I understand that most of the practices from that era are considered dark and are no longer acceptable in today's society, well, according to a few of the books I read. As Harry finished giving his refusal, he kept a careful watch on Professor McGonagall for any reaction. He could only see the shock that anyone would feel at hearing Harry Potter was kidnapped. There was nothing else. It seems the reason why Professor McGonagall never checked up on the orphan child of her friends for 10 years was because she didn't remember it. She had been obliviated. It made sense. Professor McGonagall was troubled when Harry was left with the worst kind of muggles and even questioned Dumbledore on the need for it. The fact that he was just going to dump Harry on the doorstep with a letter also caused her to speak out, but funnily enough, once she met Dumbledore's eyes, she seemed to accept everything he said. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet, but he looked angry when he slammed it back on the table. Harry quickly checked his surface thoughts, but they were only filled with how James and Lily's child was raised by the Dursleys instead of with a good magical family. There were no thoughts of delivering Harry himself to the doorstep of the muggles he despised or about the Sorting Hat. It seems Dumbledore had done some damage control already and wiped all memories from the only two people that witnessed his abduction of the heir to a noble house. He also looked like he was losing his patience, and Harry wondered how much longer he could keep up the kindly grandfather look. Mr. Potter, I am afraid that it is a school requirement to be sorted with the Sorting Hat. If you are not sorted, then you are not allowed to attend Hogwarts. Albus went for the ultimatum approach. Unfortunately, he was not dealing with a boy leaving a terrible home life and using Hogwarts as an escape. Oh, that's a shame. Everyone has told me that Hogwarts is the premier magic school in the world. I was really looking forward to studying here. Lucky I kept my trunk in my pocket, sorry for wasting everyone's time. Harry said as he turned around and started walking towards the castle entrance. He did not actually need to attend Hogwarts, he just wanted access to its library, the Room of Requirements, and to stop Dumbledore from hunting him down. Harry was not a scared and ignorant 11-year-old boy this time around after all. His public refusal to wear the Sorting Hat was risky. Sure, it held a cool sword that he wanted, but he was not going to risk being mined or *ped for absolutely no reason like every other fanfic he read. There was no telling what an ancient artifact with mind-reading powers could do, especially if it was somehow powered by Hogwarts or modified by Dark Lord Dumbledore. The hall was yet again silent in shock as they watched Harry Potter walk towards the exit. Did they think that Hogwarts was the only school he could attend? Now, Mr. Potter, no need to be hasty. I really don't see what the fuss is about. Children have worn the Sorting Hat for 1,000 years and have been fine. Won't you please humor us and be sorted like everyone else? Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore pleaded with Harry Potter when he saw that he was going to walk out the door. You know what? Fine. I will wear your old, filthy, mind-reading hat on one condition. Every teacher swears a magical oath on their life and magic, that wearing the hat will not affect me in any way and that it will never disclose anything it learns from my mind. Since you keep assuring me that everything will be fine, I assume you will have no problems with this. It was at this moment that Harry felt a mind probe touch the temporary barrier he had built in his mind. He was 99% sure that Dumbledore or Snape would attempt to read his mind at some point tonight and had been prepared. Since he obviously could not have them appearing in his mindscape, he used the ineffective method of erecting a barrier around his thoughts instead. He let out a practiced shriek of pain while holding his head exaggeratedly. Harry even dropped to his knees and continued to groan in pain. The hall erupted in a barely controlled uproar as they watched the boy hero kneel on the ground clutching his head. Before any teacher could move to check on him, he shouted out once again. Someone just attacked me. It felt like they tried to control my mind. He yelled out, making sure every student in the hall heard his accusation. Silence. Mr. Potter, accusations like that are extremely severe, and you should not joke about them. Lectured Dumbledore in his sternest disapproving voice that carried throughout the dining hall. It was a blatant attempt to discredit Harry, like the boy who cried wolf, and he was not going to let it go unanswered. Who is joking, you old bastard? Someone just tried mind our *PE me, and you call me a liar? Let us call the Aurors if you are not going to take this seriously, they can also take me home. Mr. Potter, keep a civil tongue and do not insult me. Commanded a peeved Dumbledore. This was quickly getting out of hand for him, he had expected to cower the boy easily. You insulted me first, sir, so I will return your words back to you. You calling me a liar makes me question if it was you that attacked me. We were, after all, arguing about a mind-reading hat and an oath you were going to give me. Do you also have the ability to read people's minds, headmaster? Suddenly a calming aura spread out and encompassed the dining hall. Harry was quickly able to shrug it off since he practiced a clemency, but everyone else was affected. The room was quickly pacified, and Dumbledore decided to stop pressuring Harry to put on the hat. He had overplayed his hand and had nothing to keep Harry from leaving, he might even drive him off entirely if he kept pushing. This was not the child that Mrs. Fig had reported to him. This Harry Potter had a backbone and seemed to be at least partially aware of the wizarding world. The Dark Lord cursed Rita Skeeter for her interference. The boy he had seen in Hagrid's memories was the perfect offering to increase his reputation. Now he was aware that he had been railroaded into ignorance and had chosen to read a few books to educate himself about his new situation. The Weasley child he selected to guide the boy into Gryffindor had done the complete opposite, instead, making Harry step back from the Gryffindor/Slytherin conflict to concentrate on studying. Now the boy would be harder to influence, and plans would have to be modified. And where the hell was Quirrell? Dumbledore had too much running through his mind and had fumbled what should have been a straightforward ceremony. I apologize, Mr. Potter, it was not my intention to insult you. It was just too unbelievable to think you may have been assaulted while under my protection. Since you feel so strongly about the Sorting Hat, we will skip the procedure and have you join Ravenclaw. Your debating skills reveal your wit, so you should fit right in. Professor McGonagall, could you please resume the sorting ceremony? Albus glossed over all accusations and steamrolled anything Harry may say by prompting McGonagall to continue. Harry didn't mind too much and actually preferred to finish the argument quickly. He wanted to be as low-key as he could, well, as much as a famous person could be. Even though Harry had damaged his credibility a little with his orphan propaganda, he still wanted to keep an equally good impression with pure-blood nobles, half-bloods as well as Muggleborns. He had not wanted such a confrontation over the Sorting Hat, because he didn't want to draw so much attention to himself and make it harder to enact his plans. It could have also been construed as spitting on traditions, so he made sure to explain his reasoning and hopefully gain endorsement. But he was not expecting Dumbledore to so actively push for the Sorting Hat to be used. This performance had probably lost him favor with those students that were blinded by the leader of the light routine, but they were sheep anyway. In canon, they jumped from worship, to fear, to worship, and then back to scorning the boy who lived, so he did not place too much faith on it. But a poor first impression could be detrimental. He was also not too fussed if he actually had to leave Hogwarts, as all the European schools seemed to be at the same level anyway. The Triwizard Cup competition proved that both Fleur Delacour and Victor Crumb were at the same level as Cedric Diggory in terms of skill, tactics, and spells. Beau's Batons may have even been a better choice as they had a majority of female students attending. Cho Chang was considered the best Hogwarts had to offer in terms of beauties, and while she was quite cute, she was nothing special. A broader selection of 7th years to look at would have been nice. Still, there were a few things he wanted to accomplish at Hogwarts, and joining now would make things easier than raiding the castle once Dumbledore was away, not to mention his retaliation for leaving. As he took his seat at the Ravenclaw table and noticed the inquisitive looks from his housemates, he discerned that Dumbledore's calming aura had only quieted their thoughts, not removed them. They still remembered the new first year calling the headmaster an old bastard and bringing to light the questionable situation of the Sorting Hat. He wondered how Dumbledore would stop this from getting out to the students' parents. But then again, if he could manipulate the information leaving Hogwarts about a troll attack, Quirrell dying at the hands of a student and a giant basilisk roaming the halls turning people to stone, a mind-reading hat should be no problem. Little did he know that Miss Skeeter would be receiving a memory of tonight for tomorrow's paper. He had organized a pensive delivered to her for occasions just like this. Harry watched the next few children abstain from the mind-reading hat and choose the house they wanted to sort it into. Since they had made an exception for Harry Potter, they could only break tradition and allow it. It seems like he had made a positive impression on most of the children, and there may be hope for intelligence in wizards after all. But this thought was too premature. Weasley, Ronald. After watching the kids before him abstain from the potentially dangerous artifact, he thought he would show his bravery and use this opportunity to gain some prestige. I don't know why everyone is afraid of a hat, but I'm going to be a Gryffindor. We are not scared of anything, he proclaimed as he sat on the stool to be judged. A second later, the hat had shouted, Gryffindor. The smug little git swaggered over to the Gryffindor table like he had just done something amazing. He was unaware of the many looks of derision, some even from his new housemates. Even Hermione had gone a bit pale at the implications that her thoughts were recorded for others to analyze. They had put the hat on without thinking of the consequences of having their mind read. If they had the chance to do it again, they would opt out for sure. With the sorting ceremony finished, Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms opened wide as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. His friendly, twinkly-eyed grandfather act was back in full force. Welcome, he said. Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. Thank you. He sat back down, and everybody clapped and cheered, though probably not as much as they would have before tonight. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not at either a cryptic insult of the houses or a sign of the old man's madness. The tables filled with food and Harry had to face his next challenge, Hogwarts food. It looked delicious, but as proved by Fred and George with their pranks, anyone could tamper with it. It was for this reason that Harry had 10 of his elves infiltrate the Hogwarts house elves. Well, he said infiltrate, but there was no protection at all against foreign elves. The Hogwarts house elves didn't seem to mind the new additions, and there were no wards to prevent their magic or teleporting abilities, according to the elves he sent on ahead. Harry had at least expected a little pushback from the local house elves, seeing as they were bonded to the current headmaster, to be transferred over when the position changed. An explanation that they were bonded to some of the new students had them nodding their head as if it was natural, especially when they deferred to the locals in any work that needed to be done. They would only serve their masters was apparently good enough to settle any conflict. A plate of food appeared in front of Harry with the correct markings on the plate to identify it as something prepared by his personal house elves, and he happily started eating. There was polite small talk from the Ravenclaw students, but no invasive or personal questions. It seems that a house focusing on wisdom weeded out personalities like Ronald Weasley. There were 8 other first years sorted into Ravenclaw, and he made sure to at least be on good terms with them. He was a 30-plus-year-old man in a child's body, so while there would be no serious friendships or romantic interests, he could at least create a positive impression for them know him by. Willing to help out anyone, but kept to himself, was the image he was going for. The fanfics that he read with self-inserts becoming best friends or lovers with their classmates quite frankly weirded him out. It bespoke a lack of maturity that they would be able to so easily relate to children and regress their mentality to sweet. At least with Ravenclaw, he didn't need to worry about this as much since they all seemed to give off a solitary or mature vibe. As expected of a house full of children dedicated to learning instead of playing around at school. In his original life, Chad didn't show such determination, wasting his potential by being lazy and playing instead of learning. But that was Muggle school. If he was learning magic when he was 11, he would have sacrificed his left nut to learn it. While he ate and fielded questions from inquisitive children, he wondered at what Vernon, a magic-hating bigot, would do to Mrs. Figs. He had given a parting gift to the Dursleys in the form of revealing that the crazy cat lady across the street was, in fact, a failed witch and was spying on them. He also tweaked their minds to express all the hatred they had for Harry Potter on the defenseless old woman that happily watched and reported the slavery of a child while doing nothing to help. Harry had no problems with the Dursleys as they treated him with nothing but love. Dudley, on the other hand, had a rough upbringing. Harry was Mrs. Fig in that equation, but in all fairness, he rather Dudley in the cupboard than himself. If they did nothing to Mrs. Fig, then he was okay with it as he really didn't feel the need for any revenge like Canon Harry should have done. But he kind of doubted that the Dursleys would be able to resist the temptation. Especially when a compulsion that made them think any consequences for their actions would go unreported, much like what happened to Canon Harry. Also added, was a command to not hurt her cats for any reason. As a person that liked cats, he didn't want to see them killed for his revenge against a woman that would have happily watched him suffer. This would ensure that the old B***TCH got her comeuppance and the Dursleys got to cause trouble for Dumbledore. To be honest, they did get shafted by the old goat, but there was no need to behave how they did to an innocent child. Chad was a petty person and would never let Mrs. Fig go unpunished, even if he was never going to return to number 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, to see the results. When the main meal and then the desserts disappeared from the dining table, Professor Dumbledore got to his feet, and the hall fell silent once more. Ahem, just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start-of-term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. And a few of our older students would do well to remember that as well. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die an excruciating death. Harry couldn't believe that the Dark Lord was still going to go through with his schemes after the faux pas with the Sorting Hat. After the awareness that every child's memories could possibly be accessed by anyone controlling the Sorting Hat, he was sure Dumbledore would change his plans. Harry thought for sure that Dumbledore would not risk that he had dangerous beasts in a children's school guarded by a spell found in a first-year textbook being made public. But the Dark Lord still happily announced the chance of death at school like it was nothing special. He either had balls of steel or was losing his mind, maybe even a mixture of the two. The Sorting Hat was bad publicity, but at the end of the day was not his fault and could be explained away if it was revealed. On the other hand, hiding the Philosopher's Stone behind a Cerebus, a man-eating plant, illegally enchanted keys and chess set according to Mr. Weasley's department, a troll, and poisonous potions would see him receive a public chastisement and a blow to his reputation at the very least. It was only pure luck or a lot of mind magic that he was not exposed in canon. Was he still thinking of Harry as a curious child that would want to investigate a potentially life-threatening situation because he was told not to? If he wasn't going to put on a mind-reading hat for fear of the consequences, why would he put himself in danger out of curiosity? Maybe it would take too much effort for Dumbledore to come up with another method to desensitize him to danger and lead him down the path of being reckless for no reason other than it is brave and very Gryffindor like his parents. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the teacher's smiles had become rather fixed, and the reason was made clear seconds later. The school song was excruciatingly painful to listen to and could be used as a punishment if someone was cruel enough to use torture methods in a school. Ah, music, Dark Lord Albus said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime. Off you trot. Harry was rounded up along with the other first-year Ravenclaws by a prefect and shown to their dormitory. The common room was located on the west side of Hogwarts at the top of a spiral staircase on the 5th floor. The entrance was guarded by an eagle door knocker that asked riddles of all things. As far as security precautions go, it was quite ridiculous, and Harry found himself wondering at the intelligence of a witch claiming wisdom and wit as her house traits. Which came first, the phoenix, or the flame? The door with a feminine voice asked. The flame, shouted an excited Terry Boot, eager to show off his intellect. Incorrect. A circle has no beginning, supplied the prefect, guiding them. Harry thought this was even stupider than he did before. There were other ways to interpret the question, and the riddle was very open-ended. To make it even worse, it did not explain why your answer was correct or not and just followed its programming to open when the trigger phrase was spoken. Rowena Ravenclaw must have been a pretentious B***TCH if this was her idea of being intelligent. All it did was waste your time if you got it wrong, as you only had one guess and had to wait for someone else to answer. Not to mention that other houses could gain entry to the common room if they could answer the riddle. Harry was going to have to find a way to bypass this retarded security feature as soon as he could. He was terrible at riddles and word games and could see himself destroying the door in anger. He watched as the door swung open to reveal the dormitory he would spend the next 7 years of his life if he chose to stay at school. It opened up to a wide, circular room with arched windows draped in blue and bronze silks. On the floor was a midnight blue carpet covered in stars, which was reflected onto the domed ceiling. The place was furnished with tables, chairs, and bookcases, and by the door leading up to the bedrooms stood a tall statue of Rowena Ravenclaw made of white marble. The sound of wind whistling around the windows of the tower will be relaxing while you go to sleep, Prefect Robert Hilliard informed them as he guided them to the rooms designated for first years while pointing out Ravenclaw factoids. There were 20 rooms built into the first-year level of dormitories, and each room was probably originally the size of a closet for them to fit in the tower. Luckily, magic was so *T that they could be expanded into a place able to comfortably fit 2 beds, 2 study desks, 2 closets and plenty of room to walk around in. The student quickly partnered up and claimed a room that was separated by gender, leaving Harry to find one solely for himself. Robert the prefect encouraged them to share a room, as even though they were to concentrate on studying, some human contact was apparently good for them. Harry could think of nothing worse than sharing a room with an 11-year-old, let alone the restrictions it would place on him having a constant voyeur. Even if this year's Ravenclaw first ties were evenly numbered, he would still have chosen one of the many spare rooms for himself. A private room was much welcomed since his every move would be watched when he was outside of it. This was proven correct the next morning as he went for breakfast with his housemates. There, look. Where? Next to the kid with the blonde hair. Where are his glasses? The books say he always wears them like his father. Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Did they not see him last night at the sorting ceremony? Why were they still unsure of his appearance that this morning they had to whisper to each other so loudly that it reached his ears? Had Dumbledore already started messing with everybody's minds, or had the food last night been laced with potions to muddle the memory? People lining up outside classrooms stood on tiptoe to get a look at him or doubled back to pass him in the corridors again, staring. Finding his way around was challenging enough without having his attention divided by people talking about him. He was always watching them in case they attacked. Who knows how many sleeper agents or what traps the Dark Lord had activated to test him. Luckily they had a prefect as a guide for the first couple of days, as finding your way around by yourself would be troublesome since everything seemed to move around a lot. Apparently, thanks to their guide, there were 142 staircases at Hogwarts. Wide ones, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. Then some doors wouldn't open unless you asked politely, or tickled them in exactly the right place, and doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. Harry pitied the poor bastards that hadn't trained their minds with a clemency, as even if he didn't have the Marauder's map, he would be able to consult his mental map for directions. The week progressed just like canon, and any repercussions from the first night at Hogwarts seemed to be quickly forgotten. He had instructed Rita to hold off for now with the scathing newspaper article, as he wanted Dumbledore to lower his guard, especially since he still announced that there was a massive secret in the third-floor corridor. When he had sent the memory with a house elf the first night, there had been instructions to write an article but hold off using it until the timing was right. Too much too fast could be grouped together and not punished as harshly or not have the same impact as if there was a constant reminder of Dumbledore's faults. He needed even the die-hard fans of the Lord of the Light to start questioning the mental state of their leader. Otherwise, they would band together to reflexively dismiss a lawsuit where all his errors were listed at once. Harry needed to use his ammunition sparingly and have the public come to their own conclusions instead of having it shoved in their faces and rejecting it out of loyalty to the flamboyant old geezer. Plus he didn't want to pressure the Dark Lord into making rash decisions that could see a direct confrontation until he was ready. There had been no mention of the missing Professor Quirrell, and an Auror substitute teacher had been brought in the next morning for the defense against the dark arts class when he still didn't show. They had to study the night skies through their telescopes every Wednesday at midnight and learn the names of different stars and the movements of the planets. 3 times a week they went out to the greenhouses behind the castle to study herbology, with the dumpy little witch Professor Sprout. They learned how to take care of all the strange plants and fungi and found out what they were used for. Easily the most boring class was History of Magic. Professor Binns had been very old, indeed, when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fireplace and got up the next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on and on while the students scribbled down names and dates. It didn't help that the material was straight out of the textbook and only centered around the Goblin Wars. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher and Harry's head of house, was a tiny little wizard who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk. At the start of their first class, he took the roll call, and when he reached Harry's name, he gave an excited squeak and toppled out of sight. It was quite entertaining and gained the half-goblin the attention of the room. His lesson was met with noticeably more focus than the other teachers with straightforward characters. The class everyone had really been looking forward to was defense against the dark arts. But the Auror that had been called in at the last minute, who named himself Professor Blintley, was a little uncomfortable at teaching and stuck to the textbook. It was still way better than having to put up with a stuttering minor Dark Lord hellbent on Harry's death to regain his self-esteem. The other teachers also used a gimmick to make the class focus before launching into the standard teaching methods. Professor McGonagall was strict and gave them a talking to the moment they sat down in her first class after the Animagus stunt, while Snape went for the mysterious and terrifying route. The sorting debacle must have triggered Snape's hatred for everything Potter, as he was even more vicious than Canon. Well, he tried to be. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the roll call, and like Flitwick, he paused at Harry's name. "Ah, yes," he said softly, "Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. Snape certainly was melodramatic. "As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, and snaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death. If you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." More silence followed this little speech as Snape glanced around at the students to make sure they were thoroughly under his sway. Since the students were Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, they were already geared up to pay attention as hard work and studying were what their houses admired most. The speech made Harry wonder if Snape used it for every new class, as it was exactly the same as the one used in canon for the Slytherin/Gryffindor class. "Potter," yelled Snape suddenly. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "I don't know, sir," said Harry. Of course, thanks to all the fanfiction he had read where this scene was rather prevalent, Harry knew that the answer was a sleeping potion known as the Draught of Living Death. But it would be boring if he just answered normally. He hated Snape's character and planned to destroy him for all the Snarry and Snamione trash that littered the internet. Then again, he was probably just another pawn manipulated by Dumbledore. Snape's lips curled into a sneer. "Tut, tut. Thought you wouldn't open a book before coming, Potter? Fame clearly isn't everything." "Yes, clearly, it isn't. I was told Hogwarts employed the best teachers, but you single me out knowing full well that I had only known about the magical world for a month. Do you think potions was high on my list of things to learn after I was informed that I had been kidnapped when my parents were betrayed by those claiming to love them and then murdered? I didn't even know their names or what they looked like, and you thought I would be spending my time memorizing potion ingredients. Also, if I learned everything before the first class, then what is even the point in coming here? Newsflash, you dunderhead, I have come here to learn. So how about you leave whatever crawled up your arse at home, and do the job you are being paid for? I expected better from a professor at the world's premier magic school. You are even worse than the ghost teacher," responded Harry with as much vitriol as he could pack into his scathing riposte. Snape was obviously not expecting such a reply to his mocking, and even his usually emotionless face now had a dumbfounded look on it. The Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students were openly gaping at Harry in stunned disbelief that he would so blatantly insult the professor with a reputation for harsh punishments. 50 points from Gryffindor. Snape managed to stutter out in either rage or shame, something that was out of character in canon. Professor Snape was cold as ice and was always portrayed as unflappable or emotionless while he carried out his tasks as a spy for both Dumbledore and Voldemort. He was also supposedly a master at occlumency and hid his emotions behind cynical, malicious, and sarcastic remarks. In his lonely childhood, he was insecure and vulnerable, so his first ever friend in Lily Evans became more of an obsession than love. Maybe the rather blunt reminder that he played a part in her death had shocked him enough to confuse Harry for James Potter, and his insecurities manifested, destroying his emotional control. This could also explain his mistake in taking points from Gryffindor instead of Ravenclaw. Whatever it was, Harry planned to capitalize on it to destroy the bitter man verbally before later using Skeeter to ruin his career as a potion master at Hogwarts. By publicly announcing his Death Eater membership and listing the statistics of those failing potions, there was bound to be a public outcry. Particularly since every non-Slytherin student in the last 10 years hated him. After Snape became the potions teacher, very few students ever made it to N.E.W.T level potions, and if they did, they were mostly Slytherin. Since this was a requirement to join the Aurors or St. Mungos, it cut down recruitment immensely and mostly filled it with Slytherin students. Of course, this could have been under Dumbledore's instructions since he had single-handedly done more damage to the wizarding world's proficiency than anyone else by reducing the subjects taught at Hogwarts. Filling the teaching positions with incompetent professors also didn't help. Take as many points from Gryffindor as you like, my house is Ravenclaw. Are you under some misconception that I am James Potter? I was told both my parents were in Gryffindor. Is that why you singled me out and mocked me? Were you a Death Eater that hated my parents and are now taking it out on me? "Show me your arm, you greasy little bee *tch. I demand you prove you are not a follower of the Dark Lord." Harry decided to go all in. He had initially planned to only give Snape a bit of a tongue lashing if he mocked him, but experiencing the pettiness firsthand made him decide that he did not want to put up with years of sneering and snide comments. Besides, there was no reason to keep Snape around since Voldemort's main soul piece had been dealt with, his usefulness had run out. So F***ck him to the moon. Snape looked similar to a deer surprised by the headlights of a truck and was about to become roadkill. Snape really should have predicted this outcome after his remark at the sorting ceremony was rebuffed, and Harry stood up to the headmaster. But his pettiness had got the better of him, and he just couldn't let go of his hatred of James Potter. To take it out on an innocent child was why Harry was annoyed at all the people that loved Snape. They forget that there was no reason for his vendetta against Harry Potter other than his own dislike of the child because his dad was shagging Lily and he bullied Snape in school. That's it. Canon Harry Potter was a shy child because he had been abused for 10 years and raised like a slave. For Snape, that could read minds and also experienced a terrible childhood, he would have realized this immediately. Especially with how much he had stared at Harry the first night at Hogwarts. "Out! Get out, you brat!" yelled Snape. He had lost all sense of decorum with the disrespect Harry had shown him. His pride could not tolerate such insolence from a Potter child, and by the clenching of his hands, Harry expected the potion's master to physically attack him. He had long since retrieved his wand from his wrist holster and held it under his desk just in case. "You want me to get out?" "Sure, after you show me your arm and apologize, you Death Eater coward." Snape was visibly restraining himself as he started to hyperventilate, and his veins started popping out in his rage. He was literally shaking with anger, something that Harry had thought was an exaggeration when he had heard it used. Snape clenched his jaw so hard that his teeth could be heard grinding in the completely silent classroom, and the gaze he fixed Harry with promised eternal hostility and retribution. But in the end, Harry was disappointed. Snape chose the only option available to him other than assaulting the boy who lived or continuing to teach in humiliation. He left. His robes billowed around him as he furiously stormed out of the room, probably on his way to the headmaster's office to report the incident. Harry couldn't care less, all his earlier thoughts of not forcing a direct confrontation with Dumbledore entirely forgotten. At heart, he was a keyboard warrior that had been given ultimate power overnight, and his ego had inflated to match it. There was no way he was going to take *T from someone as retarded as Snape, the man who was responsible for his own ruin. Voldemort had tried to spare Lily because Snape had asked him to. There was no way he didn't know that his actions had sold out James and her child, sentencing them to death. The students still had their mouths open in disbelief and stared at Harry as if he was an alien. They were only 11-year-olds and had never seen one of their peers stand up to an **LT, particularly for these studious children used to doing what they were told. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students were never shown to be breaking the rules or losing points, and yet today they had seen Harry Potter make Snape lose his **T. Their worldview had just been destroyed, and they didn't know if Harry Potter was a hero or a corrupted reprobate. "I guess we just self-study. He seemed to expect us to already know everything by heart anyway," Harry said in the face of all his speechless classmates gawking at him. Surprisingly, no one spoke to him for the whole double potions class, preferring to instead talk quietly amongst themselves and self-study the potions textbook while pretending he didn't exist. If he had been in Gryffindor, then there would have been near-universal partying and merrymaking for vanquishing the evil Slytherin head of house. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students were more worried about being punished and losing points for being associated with him. Bloody goody two-shoes, he thought to himself. He was once again reminded that they were only 11-year-old children, and considering the houses they had been sorted into, hard-working teachers' pets. To speak back to a professor and then argue with him until he stormed out was a completely foreign concept to them. Not to mention that fear of punishment in a government-enforced school was still a threat to them and not the joke it was to today's children. Gaming a broken system would never occur to kids that tried their hardest to gain imaginary points to have their house banner displayed for a couple of hours at the end of year feast. With his decision to not befriend children once again reaffirmed, Harry spent the rest of the class thinking on how to deal with his spur-of-the-moment outburst. Publicly calling out the head of house for Slytherin would see his efforts to stay out of their schoolyard fights moot, and even his positive first impression to Malfoy would be wasted by shaming his godfather. But Harry was not too worried, as any small consequences would be far outweighed by not having to have Snape sneering at him for years to come. The rest of the day passed quickly with no incident, not even a summons to the headmaster's office like he was expecting. But as he strolled into the dining hall, Harry was made aware of just how efficient the school was at gossiping. Even without modern-day tools like phones and social media, rumors traveled fast here. There was not a single person that was not staring at him thanks to the school rumor mill. Like he suspected, Slytherin was universally staring daggers at him, while the Gryffindor table was openly worshipping the slayer of snakes. The Weasley twins were even vocal in their appreciation, yelling out that they were not worthy while bowing in an exaggerated performance of devotion. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were just staring at him and then glancing towards the teacher's table where all the staff sat. Dumbledore had his usual twinkly eyes and grandfather appearance while Snape was trying to obliterate him with his glare. Harry just calmly sat down and started eating once he noticed a few plates discreetly being swapped out with markings indicating they were safe to eat from. Since Dumbledore had decided to not do anything, and Snape was still a teacher, then Harry decided to choose a harder path than just publicly destroying Snape's reputation. Finally, after finishing his meal, Dumbledore got up and left with a few teachers that had also finished eating. Much to the disappointment of the entire student body that had been hoping for a good show. Before Snape could retreat in embarrassment from not being able to punish Potter, a letter magically appeared on his plate. Opening it, his glare only seemed to intensify as he read it. Dear Professor Impotent. Seeing as how Dumbledore failed to either try and punish me or fire you for being a Death Eater, I can only assume he is as insane as he looks. Since he has left it to us to settle this matter, meet me in your potions class in 10 minutes. Yours sincerely. Wizarding Genius. Looking up from the letter, Snape fixed Harry with a furious scowl. After a slight nod, Snape then made a dramatic exit. Harry had to admit, the man knew how to look intimidating with his billowing robes and imperial stride. Thanks to a double class of self-study, he had prepared for few different scenarios depending on how Dumbledore reacted to the news of his little sacrificial lamb throwing a tantrum. This one had been the least likely to be used in his opinion, as he would have put money on being summoned to the headmaster's office for the disappointed grandfather act. With the students leaving in disappointment after tonight's entertainment failed to happen, Harry also made his way out to meet with Snape. Dodging a few enthusiastic Gryffindor well-wishers with a few pleasantries and apologies for prior engagements, he made his way out of sight before a house elf appeared and teleported him to potions class. He was careful to make sure no magical paintings were spying on him to report his unique form of travel. Although apparition was prevented in Hogwarts by its wards, house elves were free to move as they pleased, even with passengers. Snape walked in to find Harry sitting in the same place he was earlier today with his feet up on the desk. How a first year made a letter appear on his dinner plate and then arrive before him, only made Snape's mood worsen at the implications. Get your feet off the table, Potter. Snape ordered with a sneer. Harry just smiled and complied, giving the petty tyrant a small win would speed the meeting along so he could concentrate on other matters. It would also have the added effect of quickly solving the issue of having to deal with disgruntled Slytherin bullies with something to prove. The reason I have asked you here tonight is to have you reign in your house, so I don't have to deal with their sh*t. Also, for you to actually do the job you are being paid for, teaching potions without being a complete d*ck about it. How do you feel about that? Harry condescendingly stated. Snape's frosty gaze turned even more cold as a sneer formed on his disapproving grimace. You pretentious little child. What makes you think you have any say over how I teach or how Slytherin acts towards you? Typical Potter. Thinks the world revolves around you and you can have your way just because you think you are special. Well, I have news for you. You are nothing, and you will thoroughly experience that fact while you attend Hogwarts. Harry just laughed at Snape's little tirade. It was clear that he had a lot of unresolved childhood issues. The fact that he had been indoctrinated into a bloodthirsty cult that are *ped and killed those they thought inferior had done nothing to help him adjust into a person capable of teaching children. How people had any sympathy for the man was frankly mind-boggling to Harry. I thought Slytherin revered cunning, resourcefulness, and ambition. As the head of house, you should be the epitome of these values, or at the very least, be proficient in them. For reasons that I cannot fathom, the wizarding world idolizes me, and I have just been introduced back into this world. The Minister of Magic and the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement personally met me at the Hogwarts Express to assure me that I was in no danger and to inform them if I had any problems. Then we have you, someone that is universally hated by every student that is not Slytherin. I did a bit of checking after your unprovoked attack on me in class. You have the lowest rate of Newt-level students passing ever in Hogwarts history. Couple this with my suspicion that you are a Death Eater, and accusations could be made that you have been deliberately undermining our law enforcement and metawizards for the past decade. Now imagine if I called my new friends the Minister, head of DMLE and Rita Skeeter. What if I then told them about how in front of the entire class, the very first time I met the potions professor, he singled me out and then proceeded to mock me. Not for my behavior, but for being abducted and forced to live with abusive guardians to keep me ignorant of the wizarding world and my heritage. For not learning the entire potions textbook in a month after being told I'm a wizard, and I may be in danger from a terrorist organization. All of this because the professor in question was part of the terrorist group that brutally murdered my parents and hated me because his leader died while trying to kill a baby. Tell me, oh mighty cunning and ambitious head of Slytherin House, how long would you last in the face of the whole wizarding world scrutinizing your every action since you attended Hogwarts? How would they react if I made accusations that you were training the current Slytherin students in your treasonous political views and forcing them to attack the boy who lived because he was responsible for ending the terror of Voldemort? Do you think that the mad old bastard that is our headmaster would still keep you hired at Hogwarts? I find it absolutely ridiculous that you were not fired on the spot after you ran to whine to him about a child having the audacity to not put up with your unwarranted and frankly criminal psychological abuse. Snape could only stare at Harry in silence as he continuously ranted about how he would whip the magical world into a frenzy and then aim them at him and the Slytherin students. Dumbledore would not be able to shield him from the shitstorm that would ruin his life if this story ran in the Daily Prophet and his Slytherin students were not very discreet with their opinions. Snape needed to keep this contained. He knew full well how the sheep would react and losing his job would be the least of his worries. Not that Snape actually wanted to stay as the potions professor. But the magical oaths he made to Dumbledore and Voldemort would be hard to maintain if he was not allowed to remain at Hogwarts. Snape was now aware of Harry's intellect, and even after his stunt at the opening ceremony, they had still underestimated the cunning and guile the supposed ignorant child had. He had expected to easily cower the sniveling child but had instead made himself look like a fool with his inability to punish the brat. Thanks to Dumbledore's insistence to wait and see how the boy reacts, his reputation was now in tatters. Well, you old fool, his reaction was to blackmail me with the threat of ruining my life. You can't blame me for taking a more direct approach. Snape thought to himself, a green child was no match for a professional wizard. You talk a good game, Potter, but in the end, you are still a silly little child trying to play with the grown-ups. You voluntarily meet me in secret and then proceed to threaten to ruin my life. What if I just decided to wipe your memory or force you to drink a loyalty potion? After all, you repeatedly call me a Death Eater, what is to stop me acting like one? Harry looked at the sneering, greasy-haired emo, and gave him a derisive snort. His goal was to force Snape to use legilimency so he could capture his mental avatar. Snape's occlumency defense was to hide his important thoughts and memories behind a shield of other fake or worthless memories. Harry could easily just continue destroying the memories Snape used as a shield, but he was afraid of wiping out something useful. After all, the man for all his many faults was an accomplished potions master. Harry wanted those memories for himself, so he didn't need to learn why stirring a cauldron clockwise would make a potion explode instead of anti-clockwise to produce a cure for a laxative or something. As I mentioned before, Madame Bones was kind enough to give me a way to contact her if I was in trouble. I have a friend that will summon her if he doesn't hear from me in 30 minutes. Plus, you are only a potions teacher, you probably needed the help of your Death Eater friends to hold down women as you are *ped them because you couldn't even cast a spell to clean your hair. You know the old saying, he who can, does, he who cannot, teaches. Harry then laughed in Snape's face after mocking him, the man's grimace of displeasure only making him laugh harder. For all of Snape's supposed mastery over the mind arts, he was easily riled up by insults to his magical proficiency. Probably having to do with his unresolved childhood issues and having to watch the girl he obsessed over pick his tormentor over him. Any restraint Snape had that was stopping him mind-raping Harry was immediately destroyed when he heard the little shit so crudely slander him. Knowing he needed to act fast if the child's threats of horrors were genuine, he decided to read his mind to find the best way to handle this precarious situation. Legilimens. Snape coldly spoke as he used his magic to force his way into what he thought was an unprotected mind. Harry smiled as he felt the intrusion into his mindscape and entered into his vault to watch how Snape would deal with futuristic weaponry. Pretty well as it turned out. After the initial surprise of finding himself in a post-apocalyptic town instead of sifting through jumbled memories, Snape had his wand out ready to defend himself. After trying to retreat back to his own mind and finding a barrier preventing him from leaving, Snape could only go with his original plan of subjugating the child's mind. He could have put his full mental strength into forcing his way through, but that would leave himself open to an attack. Harry was not about to let him escape after provoking the potions teacher into invading his mind in the first place. Home field advantage was actually a real thing in mind magic. Harry launched a few weak raids of ghouls and raiders to make it seem like he was actively trying to attack Snape and defend the raider base. He wanted to lure Snape in enough so there would be no chance of escape. If Snape had put all his effort into retreating, then the most Harry would have been able to do was give him a crippling blow before having to invade Snape's mind to finish him off. This way, he could cut this piece of invading soul off and scan it for all of his memories. He doubted Snape was skilled or paranoid enough to limit the memories of his mental avatar before attacking. The lasers and bullets only stumped Snape once before he adapted his shields to stop both, and his cautious advance only saw him receive a few wounds. Harry had to give him credit. Although the man was an absolute F***quit, he knew his way around spellwork. The Sectum Semper curse was invented by him when he was still in Hogwarts after all, and his love for the dark arts had supplied him with many inventive spells to be used on the poor raiders. After half an hour in the mindscape, the raider base was littered with enough gore to make a horror movie look like a comedy. Snape was not averse to slaughtering his way through Harry's mental defenses, showing his experience in killing humans with magic. But by the time he reached the decoy computer that should have been Harry's mental core, the raider base had been surrounded by the real enemies that would make those Snape had already defeated seem like a warm-up. Thanks for playing along, Snavellis. I was worried that once you saw that I knew a clemency, you would do everything you could to escape. Now you have no chance to leave. Wow, you haven't looked this miserable since you saw me walking around outside the house Voldemort attacked. Cheer up, you will soon have a new master to follow. Harry mocked the panicked professor at seeing his current predicament. How do you know I was there? Snape shouted out in disbelief, completely forgetting about the Snavellis insult in his shock. Harry had only been a year and a half when he was orphaned after all. Oh, you unfortunate idiot, I will return your earlier words back at you. You are just a silly little child trying to play with the grown-ups. My mind has been fully developed since Voldemort hit me with the killing curse. I remember everything from the night your master killed my parents. He also made the mistake of leaving a juicy piece of his soul behind for me to extract all of his memories. I know it was you that supplied Voldemort with half of the prophecy that ended up directing him at me. Even your begging to spare my mum for your sick desires was there for me to discover. No, it was an accident, I didn't mean to. I loved Lily. Snape cried out in horror at the implications of this shocking news. Ha ha ha, you are pathetic. You claimed to love my mother but didn't even warn her of Voldemort's plan to kill her husband and child. Even if you hated James Potter, that does not excuse you for watching on as Voldemort tried to kill her innocent child. No, I went straight to Dumbledore and warned him. He assured me he would keep her safe. Snape was visibly distraught while shouting out justifications for his most painful mistakes. Harry couldn't help it, he laughed even harder at the thought of Snape groveling to Dark Lord Dumbledore to protect Lily while he plotted to kill her even as he made Snape swear a binding oath. You really are a dunderhead. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore is the greatest Dark Lord of our age, and you swore yourself to his service even as he plotted the death of the only person you ever loved. It is really too funny. What do you mean? Dumbledore is the leader of the light. Snape said in mounting horror, any semblance of dignity or composure now completely gone. Tom Marvolo Riddle, aka Voldemort, was just a pawn created by Dumbledore to increase his reputation after he betrayed Grindelwald for the Death Stick and fame. Do you honestly think he would have interviewed a drunken incompetent witch for the outdated divination role in the Hog's Head Inn? Aberforth hates his brother with a passion for killing their sister, and you think that Albus just decided to use his brother's inn for an interview? When Hogwarts is right next door and all other meetings are conducted there? You actually think that it was your good luck to stumble into a true prophecy occurring just at the right time so you could report it back to Voldemort? I have no idea if he orchestrated the prophecy as well as the situation, but do you think he was incapable of putting up a privacy charm? You poor gullible fool, just like the puppet Voldemort, you have been dancing to the old man's tune since you were a first-year student at Hogwarts. And then Harry proceeded to laugh as Snape fell to his knees, crippled with hysteria at the sudden knowledge of the machinations he was a victim of. The loudspeakers echoing Harry's mocking laugh to directly pierce through Snape's willpower. The troops surrounding the raider base didn't even need to attack as Snape faded away as his mental discipline was destroyed by the news that his whole life was a lie. The bundle of hate, depression, sadness, and bitterness that was Snape was defeated without even a grand showdown. His insecurities and unresolved emotional issues ended up destroying his usual superb mental discipline. But Harry always suspected that Snape was just another fool that thought he was a master of clemens. A clemency was mastering your emotions, not just bottling them up behind a cold exterior. If Snape was a Jedi, he would be as shit as Anakin Skywalker. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.